Europe on edge, Iran in flux, the Supreme Court on gay marriage, 2016 hopefuls jockeying for position, and the President's State of the Union pre-sale. Tonight on Washington Week.
We will continue to do everything in our power to help France seek the justice that is needed.
The European terror attacks continue to reverberate as the U.S. and other nations grapple with the best way to stay on guard.
We have to be on the offense around the world and kill them over there before they have a chance to kill us here.
A brewing standoff over Iran between Congress and the White House and its allies, to sanction or not.
We should not impose further sanctions now. That would be counterproductive, and it could put at risk the valuable international unity that has been so crucial to our approach.
The legality of gay marriage will now be decided by the Supreme Court. On the hustings, candidates huddle with donors, peddle their possibilities, and step up the 2016 talk.
I speak to members of my own party in asking that you do not place purity ahead of unity.
Plus, the president hits the road to promote his legacy. This week's Friday Focus previews next week's State of the Union address. Covering the week, Michael Duffy, executive editor of Time magazine. Tom Jelton, national security correspondent for NPR. Joan Biskupik, legal editor for Reuters. Robert Costa, political reporter for The Washington Post. And John Harwood, chief Washington correspondent for CNBC.
Award-winning reporting and analysis. Covering history as it happens. Live from our nation's capital, this is Washington Week with Gwen Ifill. Once again, live from Washington, moderator Gwen Ifill.
Good evening. After a few missteps, including the White House decision not to send a higher-ranking representative to last weekend's massive Paris peace march, the president joined with staunch ally British Prime Minister David Cameron today to present a united front.
We ought to make sure we do everything we can to keep our country safe. It means countering this poisonous, fanatical death cult of a narrative that is perverting the religion of Islam.
I do not consider it an existential threat. As David said, this is one that we will solve. We are stronger.
The president made the case today that the challenge in Europe is a different one than it is here in the U.S. How is that so, Michael?
He did seem to draw that distinction, Gwen, and in one sense at least he's right. There are probably 30 times more, just in sheer numbers, of returned jihadis in Western Europe than there are in the United States. Western Europe, mostly in France, the UK, Germany, and Belgium, have about 5,000 men, mostly men who've returned from the Middle East, having fought there, having been trained there, and now live in Western Europe. We have maybe 150. So the threat is closer. It's more mixed in. But I think what the attacks over the last week in Paris, like the attacks in Ottawa and Canada and Australia last year, have proved is that the West is united in one thing, and that is that a decade or so after 9/11, there is still no really coherent or successful strategy yet for dealing with Islamic terror, whether you are in the United States or in Europe. We have tried massive military invasions, and that hasn't worked very well. We've tried trillion-dollar nation building, and that has been frustrating. We are currently engaged in much less expensive assassination and drone campaigns in, for example, Yemen and elsewhere. That hasn't been all that satisfying so far, as we saw in Paris. And we've also pulled out of some places and created voids for terrorist groups to move in. So while they are united to some extent in purpose, they also share this problem, which is that they haven't been able to solve this puzzle. And it's clear that the problem continues to grow.
They haven't solved the larger puzzle, but what about even a week later solving what happened there? Are they any closer to knowing who exactly is responsible?
Well, when it comes to taking responsibility for terrorist attacks, there's who claims responsibility,
right? But who really is?
And who really is? And of course, that's tricky here because while both sets of attackers on the kosher market and on the magazine headquarters had given credit to different groups in Iraq and in Yemen, it's not clear that those groups claimed claimed them as actual members. It may not matter. They're just as deadly whether they're full-fledged members or not. And what we saw this week is both groups seem to claim responsibility, though it's not clear that they actually had any.
Now, Micah, you mentioned the Ottawa attacks, which I think people now pretty much uniformly think was definitely a lone wolf attack. What do we know about whether the attacks in the planned attack in Belgium and the attacks in Paris, were they also single cell sort of operations, or is there a concern now that there may be a whole campaign?
That was, of course, the initial concern was that there would be a campaign and a follow-on set of them. Yeah. What I think has emerged this week that is worth noting is that both of the attacks in Paris were by very, very small cells, 2 people each. And those are the hardest to crack as opposed to lone wolves, which are almost impossible to do so. And of course, there's another interesting link, which is that one of the attacks was by 2 brothers, which we also saw in the Boston Marathon attack. This is one of the tightest men most men will ever know. They have a brother. It's like a covalent bond, and a very difficult one for investigators or people who are involved in surveillance or law enforcement to get inside of. So that's another worrisome detail of these. That is clear, again, a pattern.
Earlier today, we saw a united Anglo-American alliance, Prime Minister Cameron, President Obama speaking out together. But what is the expectation in France for the United States moving forward?
Well, one of the things that when Attorney General Eric Holder was in France, one of the things he was trying to say to them is you have to work harder at law enforcement. You have to lower the standards by which you arrest, detain, and question people. We are, in the United States, this is a difference also, Gwen, that we are subjecting people to a very low standard. Material support of terrorism can be as little in this country as buying a plane ticket. That doesn't fly in European countries, and Holder was trying to get them to lower what it takes to bring people in and essentially sweat them. France also this week cracked down on incendiary speech. Belgium launched some raids, and of course Cameron, we heard, say we want more surveillance of what goes on the internet.
Yeah, and we actually heard the president talking a lot about surveillance and kind of this post-Snowden era, so I think we're still going to see this continue to roll out. There was another interesting topic that bubbled to the surface at today's Obama-Cameron news conference, Iran. The president is promising to veto any congressional efforts to impose new sanctions while negotiations continue about Iran's nuclear ambitions.
And the question I had for members of Congress, including those folks in my own party, is why is it that we would have to take actions that might jeopardize the possibility of getting a deal over the next 60 to 90 days? What is it precisely that is going to be accomplished?
And British Prime Minister Cameron has gone so far as to lobby lawmakers on Capitol Hill today. And the president said if talks fail, he will be the first to ask Congress to, quote, tighten the screws. So given all of that, what is the state of these talks, Tom?
Well, Gwen, have you heard the expression make or break?
Yeah.
We've applied it before to these talks. We are now in the third round of these talks, the second extension. There was going to be there was an interim agreement that would last 6 months. That was extended for 4 months. Now we're in a 7-month extension. And basically what's happening is that, one, there's no sign of progress. Both the Iranian and the American and other British officials are now saying they can't report that any progress has been made. And then, as you say, you have Congress that's just finally fed up with these extensions, no sign of progress, and saying basically we're going to take matters into our own hand. We're going to draft sanctions that will take effect, that'll give you more leverage, because now the Iranians are going to know that if these talks fail, that there'll be a new set of sanctions coming on them. That's the background to what the president said.
They must think on some level that Congress is on the verge of doing something what they consider to be dangerous.
Oh, Congress is definitely on the verge of doing something. I mean, we had a majority of members last year ready to vote for sanctions. Now we have new Republicans in who have replaced Democrats. Plus we have a number of Democrats, including some pretty leading members of as the president said, of his own party. So the latest vote totals would suggest that actually you could get sanctions being approved in the Senate as early as next week.
Did today change anything? I know it's early, we're just in this evening, but this kind of tough talk from David Cameron and the president?
This was extraordinary, Joan. I mean, you had the leader of another country standing up there for an hour next to the president and saying, yeah, I called a couple of senators and weighed in on it, and he's weighing in on what's essentially a domestic policy issue. They really, really don't want this sanctions legislation passed. Now, you ask, is it going to make a difference? It might make a difference, I think, with some Democrats. I don't think necessarily with Republicans it's going to make a difference. We had a very interesting and telling comment this week from Tom Cotton, a new senator from Arkansas, who basically said, we don't care if this torpedoes the negotiations, because the intended consequence is to torpedo the negotiations because we think the negotiations are wrong-headed, basically.
But beyond having Prime Minister Cameron call a few senators, where is this administration and this White House going to find the political capital to get this through?
Political capital on, you mean as
in
far
Congress,
as...
to not have Congress
Robert,
block
they have in mind that they're not going to call this a treaty. If they do get an agreement, they're not going to call it a treaty, because if it's a treaty, then you have to get it confirmed by the Senate. So they're saying it's not a treaty. They're hoping that they can just bypass Congress, and when it comes to lifting sanctions, which would be the first part of the implementation of an agreement, we could see something very much like the president had done with Cuba, executive actions that lift a lot of the sanctions against Iran, because you know, as you imply, there's not support in Congress for lifting those sanctions, so the administration would have to do this unilaterally, really.
Tom, does their nervousness about sanctions suggest to you that the talks are close to some kind of a breakthrough, that they don't want to upend, or that they're in such bad shape that that would simply end them completely?
It's not unimportant that John Kerry was today in Paris meeting with his counterpart.
He had 8-hour meeting with Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister. So there's certainly a lot going on. There's going to be another meeting in a couple of days. You know, they say the darkest hour is just before dawn, and both sides have been very tight-lipped about this. So the fact that they say no progress is being made, you know, who knows?
Is there any incentive for Iran to cooperate on this?
Well, sanctions have been terrible for the Iranian economy. I mean, if they could get sanctions relief, you know, that would be important. But you know what? The Supreme Leader this week tweeted, there's recent recommendations for the new year: make the country immune to sanctions, pay attention to the goals behind the enemy, rely on domestic power. Doesn't seem like he sees much of an advantage there.
Okay, well, we'll be waiting and see. Big news today from the Supreme Court, where the justices agreed to hear not one, not two, but 4 challenges to gay marriage bans across the country. This is the constitutional debate both sides have been waiting for, isn't it, Joan?
Yes, we were so anxiously awaiting it. We thought it would even come in October.
Yeah.
No, but they did. Today, the justices said they're going to hear this case in April with a decision likely by the end of June. 2 big questions. One is, does the Constitution protect a nationwide right to gay marriage? Second question is, if a state still is allowed to ban gay marriage for its own people, must it recognize a gay marriage from another state when those people move in? So 2 questions, going to be an extraordinary set of arguments in April with a case from the Midwest. It involves state bans in Ohio, Michigan, Tennessee, and Kentucky. That's where a regional court of appeals, the 6th Circuit, upheld those bans, saying, no, I'm going to separate. This court decided to separate itself from all the other courts that had been ruling in this area to say, no, we haven't gotten a clear signal from the Supreme Court, and the right to decide what marriage laws we're going to have rests with the states, not with courts.
Now, the 36 states have okayed same-sex marriage, and there's that old, reliable chestnut that says that the Supreme Court is a lagging indicator in American politics. So is it a done deal? They're absolutely going to come through and do this, or are we going to be surprised?
Well,
not that you know the answer. Oh, you do know the answer.
She just not know it.
Okay, 2 things. First of all, in October when they didn't take it, only 19 states had allowed same-sex marriage at that point. So you're right that we've now had this growing momentum, but we also now have the split in the circuits, too. So those are 2 reasons why the justices weigh in. I actually think it is inevitable. I don't like to, really predict in a hardcore way on this court because it can surprise in the end. But you've got Justice Kennedy right in the middle, having issued a series of rulings over nearly 20 years that all would support gay rights. You have 36 states now. And really, irrespective of how you might think about gay marriage, there is this conflict in the nation that the justices have to resolve. And if they go the opposite way, it will be trying to reverse a real sea change that's occurred.
Well, Joan, you've covered the Supreme Court for so long. To what extent are they influenced by popular sentiment? I mean, there does seem to be, as you say, a kind of a growing feeling in this country that maybe gay marriage is okay. Does that weigh into their considerations?
Well, it's not supposed to.
I know.
but of course they do. And they pay attention to what the states are doing. And in fact, in many rulings, they will say, here's what's happened in the states. And because that matters to them, they can point to that. And I'm sure, they're 9 human beings. They're out in the world. They know what's happening. Justice Kennedy himself has written about the evolving understanding of equality for gay men and women. So even though they would be basing their decision on legal precedent, they would also be looking to the larger cultural, social shifts that naturally work their way in.
Beyond Justice Kennedy, who else should we be paying attention to on the court? Who could be a swing vote here?
I wonder about Justice Roberts.
Well, this question would play into that. For the last time we saw the gay marriage dispute, a modest version of what we've got now in 2013, Justice Kennedy was with the 4 liberals. Chief Justice John Roberts was with the conservatives, saying, no, we want to uphold a federal law that said marriage should be defined as between a man and woman for purposes of federal benefits. But Chief Justice John Roberts has surprised us before, for example, in the Obama-sponsored health care law. You know, I think there's a chance that he could go to the other side, but Robert, it won't matter. They just need 5.
This is one of these rare cases where both sides wanted the court to take this up. Advocates for and against.
Right. Absolutely, because first of all, you've got this discrepancy out there for what is the right for people who want to get married, but then for people who don't want the right, they say these lower federal courts are now occupying the field. They have been able to dictate what happens in the majority of the states. The Supreme Court should come in and set them straight.
We have so much else to cover tonight. Let's just keep going. Elbows are being thrown, staff is being hired, and the 2016 presidential season has begun. At least it has for Republicans. Every punch gets a counterpunch. Every expression of interest elicits a seriously considering. Every State of the State speech becomes a test run.
As I traveled the country over the last year, you may have heard about that. Traveled a little bit around the country in the last year. This anxiety was the most palpable emotion that I saw and felt. More than anger, more than fear, anxiety.
Party members meeting tonight as we speak here on the East Coast in California with their annual meeting. How are things shaking out?
What we're seeing right now is a generational divide in the Republican Party, and it's a surprising turn of events. Have you said a year ago, would we have Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, and Mike Huckabee?
6 months ago.
6 months ago, a month ago.
Yeah.
They're all in, it seems, or at least leaning toward running in 2016, and that's really shaking everything up. Because the younger crop of senators and governors, Scott Walker, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, they're all looking for oxygen. They're trying to mount their first national campaigns, yet you still have these past figures who are real party heavyweights trying to come back and run again.
When you talk about real party heavyweights, let's just go right to Mitt Romney. What is a strategy for someone who has got that high name recognition and yet last seen was pretty soundly defeated?
Speaking with his advisors tonight, they feel confident that though this has been a bit of a rocky rollout, not everyone in the party has embraced Romney's possible return to the stage. They feel that when they look at the national polls, they are competitive with Secretary Clinton, and they feel in the long race, they can still win the nomination.
How much of Romney, if he is for real, and I think a week ago most people would have thought he isn't, and now a week later they think he is, how much of it is just about his feeling that he would be better than Jeb Bush?
There is certainly a rivalry between these two major clans in American politics. The House of Bush, Romney, of course, his father runs in 68. And Romney feels he has a legacy for his family. He also believes he can be better than Bush. He thinks Bush has real vulnerabilities on Common Core, the education standards, and on immigration. And if Romney does run and formally runs, I hear he's going to run as a proud Republican, someone who's not going to try to change the party mantra on education or immigration.
What about
go ahead, Joan.
What about reverberations with the other candidates, like Governor Christie? What kind of reaction do you think this is causing among the ones that looked like they were more positioned?
So a lot of them had wanted to wait months to maybe think about running and launching a campaign in the spring. This has sped everything up. Huckabee, if you're a conservative, he's already making trips to Iowa. He's launching a book tour. You need to start building the relationships now, courting the donors. It's really moved up the calendar.
Rand Paul was in New Hampshire this week. But what I guess I wonder about is the people like the Scott Walkers. I don't really see them getting nervous and rushing into it. Isn't there an alternate theory, which is let these guys run it out, and especially with the incredible pushback, establishment pushback against Romney this week?
I think that's a great point. And when you talk to people close to Walker and close to Rand Paul, they think this is actually an opportunity because you'll have Bush, Romney fighting for that establishment vote. You'll have Huckabee and Cruz and others, Ben Carson, Santorum. He's meeting with his guy, Foster Friess, in Arizona this weekend. So there'll be a big fight on the right, a big fight for the establishment. Who can come right up the center? Maybe Walker. He balances both of those wings of the party. Maybe Paul.
Well, Robert, how much, what are the implications of a big fight like this? One, between the heavyweights, between Romney and Bush, but even more broadly. I mean, is there any danger for the party? You know, one, you burn up a lot of resources, you hurt some feelings, you know. What are sort of the long-term political fallout implications of this?
There are various schools of thought. Talking to a few Republican National Committee members who were out in San Diego tonight, they feel like if this plays out in a major party drama, it could make the nominee better because they got through a tough primary, or it could lead to establishment candidates who are battered, end up killing each other's candidacies, and you'd have someone like Ted Cruz perhaps rise and snag the nomination.
Okay, two quick questions. One, how much of this is about grabbing the bucks before somebody else gets them?
It's huge. Everyone, you need big money to run. That's why Santorum's courting Foster Friess. Look at the Santorum model from 2012, what happened to Huckabee in 2008. You could win the Iowa caucuses, but if you don't have the money long-term to mount a national campaign, you'll fade.
And of all the people who have talked about running, expressed interest, who is less likely to be the nominee, John Bolton or George Pataki?
I talked to former Ambassador Bolton yesterday. He says he's not dissuaded by this wall of money he sees from Bush and Romney. And look at, you can run for president now, get a lot of press attention, get some grassroots dollars, and survive pretty far.
You're saying it's our fault.
Yeah, well, I'm not.
The more the merrier. That's in fact that's what a lot of people are saying. And you know what? I'm all for that. The more the merrier. It's fun for us. Finally tonight, as the president prepares to deliver his annual State of the Union address this coming Tuesday, he has taken the unusual step of forecasting what it will contain. Contributing correspondent John Harwood of CNBC clues us in our Friday Focus.
After 6 years, presidents can get overtaken by events and see Americans tune out. So President Obama's strategy for previewing this year's State of the Union is to touch their lives as many ways as he can. In Washington, he announced steps to protect Americans from cybercrime.
We're introducing new legislation to create a single, strong national standard so Americans know when their information has been stolen or misused.
In Phoenix, a cut in borrowing costs for some home buyers.
Starting this month, the Federal Housing Authority will lower its mortgage insurance premium rates enough to save the average new borrower more than $900 a year.
In Knoxville, a proposal in partnership with states to make 2 years of community college free.
Community colleges should be free for those willing to work for it. Because in America, quality education cannot be a privilege that is reserved for a few.
And in Detroit, he announced new federal money for apprenticeship programs to help young people find good jobs.
We want young people to see that they have opportunities. They don't all have to go to a 4-year college. They can get an apprenticeship, save some money, start working.
Will congressional Republicans give him all of this? Doesn't sound like it.
We're listening to the American people. We hope he'll start to listen too and reconsider his opposition to some of our jobs bills.
But a lame duck president's best chance is to give as many people as possible a reason to like his speech. Gwen?
You can watch the State of the Union for yourself live and online with Judy Woodruff and me this Tuesday. Our PBS NewsHour special coverage will include the analysis of Mark Shields and David Brooks. In the meantime, stay online for more Washington Week later tonight in our webcast extra. That's at pbs.org/Washington Week. And we'll see you again next week on Washington Week. Good night.